Hi, and good evening, and welcome to this month's Voices Beneath the Waves. My name is Stephanie Miele, and I am your host for this evening. I have an amazing guest lined up for everybody tonight. I am super excited to welcome Anna DeLoach to the podcast. So if we can bring Anna up on, hey,
Hi, how are you?
how are you?
Good, good.
Good, good. I'm just going to take a second and read a little snippet of your bio and then start going into the questions, just so the viewership understands who you are and what you've done. And it's going to be a very snippet, a small snippet of what you've done, because your career is expansive and amazing. So Anna took an early retirement from her mainframe computer career to dive. You began shooting underwater video to assist your husband, Ned, in documenting fish life for your co-authored book, Reef Fish Behavior, Florida, Bahamas, Caribbean. Over the past 30 years, you've produced marine life columns entitled Encounters for the Ocean Realm, Skin Diver, Scuba Diving, and Alert Diver magazine. Your career has changed, in my opinion, changed a lot of lives and educated so many people on reef fish identification. So I'm just going to start diving, no pun intended, into these questions. So your story is fascinating because you didn't grow up watching Jacques Cousteau or dreaming of the ocean. You began in computers. You spent 13 years writing code for mainframe operating systems. Help me understand how you, as a computer programmer with a minor in mathematics, transitioned into one of the world's leading citizen science fish behavior experts. That's a loaded question. So how did it begin? How did you walk me through it?
Well, as you said, my career started in computer science and working with mainframe operating systems. And I was born in Japan, lived briefly in the US, and then we moved back to Japan. So I grew up, spent the 60s in Japan, and my mother, who was a very eccentric Japanese artist, was really afraid of the water. So we had no concept of going to the ocean or lakes or anything else. But my American grandmother urged her to make sure we learned how to swim. So we did. And but there was no Jacques Cousteau, no Sea Hunt, no Zale Perry, no one to look up to. But we moved back to the States. I went through college and went into my computer career, and I had friends who were divers. And one of them had a sport fishing boat. And I've told this story before, but I don't know that I've told it to very many people. But they would take a day off from work and go out and they would dive. And offshore Jacksonville, you have to go 15, 20 miles offshore. It's deep, and you have to find clear water. And I would just go, I and some of the other friends would go along. We weren't divers, but we'd go out on the boat and just to be out there. And, they were always saying, why don't you learn to dive? And I had no desire. But one day the owner of the boat was running the boat, and he said, I want you to reach in that bag and get my mask and put that mask on and hang onto the ladder and just look down in the water and watch the divers jump in, because he knew I was interested in natural history, because I always wanted to see, they would fish between dives, and I always wanted to see the stomach contents of the fish that they caught. So, this is a little geek brain of mine. And he said, get in and just watch the fish. So, clutching the ladder, I went down and stuck my face in the water, and like, holy moly, there were a couple hundred barracuda right under the boat. And I was back on the swim platform in 2 seconds. And they convinced me, they're not going to hurt you. Get back in the water, get back on the ladder. And so I got back down and watched, and the divers jumped in. And this vortex of barracudas just kind of started swirling and following the divers down. And it was this beautiful deep blue water and this gorgeous vortex of fishes following the bubbles. And I could see the divers down at 85 feet on the wreck they were diving on. And it was just so beautiful. And I was mesmerized by it. And then the barracuda started coming back up to the boat, and I was back on the swim platform. But then the way my brain works, the questions started, why were those barracuda hanging out under the boat? We'd only been here 30 minutes. Why did they follow the divers down? Were they going to get something to eat from the divers? Were they going to try to bite the divers? Do they live all the time on the wreck? So I had all these questions, and I ended up going to the dive shop the next week and signing up and learning to dive.
Damn.
And yeah, and then I joined, and then I was totally ed up with it, as they say. I joined the local dive club. Jacksonville Scuba Knots have a dive club here. I joined the dive club. I met a woman instructor at the dive shop where I'd been certified, Beth Strawbridge, and I really looked up to her. She convinced me to join the Jacksonville Reef research team. And
Wow.
in Florida, you live in Florida, right? So
I'm about 3 hours south of you. So one of
okay.
these days, maybe I'll just come up and buy a cup of coffee.
Jacksonville Dive. Well, they have Florida in the 80s had a very active artificial reef program, and they enlisted
Yes.
different dive organizations around the state to form reef research teams. And they gave all the training. They trained us to do site surveys and learn how to identify invertebrates and learn how to identify fishes and see if there were suitable sites to drop artificial reefs. And so I joined that team and I learned a lot. I really honed my skills in diving. I learned how to ID all these things. And that's where I learned that I really didn't get into diving for the sake of diving. And Beth said, yeah, some people just want to move freely in 3 dimensions and some people want to learn. And so she said, it's okay, whatever you do. So I knew early on that I wanted to do something with my diving. I didn't want to just dive for the sake of diving. And yeah. And then I knew Ned, he was active in the cave diving community here. He went to the same dive shop and had his diving guide to underwater Florida that he had in publication. And he wrote for dive magazines. And he and Paul, but he taught school during that time too. And when he and Paul, they had just published their first fish ID book. And I learned the story later, but they hadn't been able to find a lot of information about the distribution of reef fishes. The information was there. It was just in scientific publications that were in, journals and in libraries.
Yeah.
So they had this idea to create an organization that was similar to Audubon, where they would enlist divers to collect volunteer divers to survey fish and collect that information and make it freely available to the public. But they were busy publishing books. So they published the fish book, the creature book, and the coral book. And finally, in '93, they had time to act on this idea. And they had formed Reef Environmental Education Foundation, Reef. And in '93, I and about a dozen other people who they knew through the community in Florida who were into fish, were invited to participate in the first field survey in Key Largo. So that was where I kind of found my community that week.
Yep.
The computer industry, I had no interest anymore after that. And so we spent a week practicing and trying out these ideas they had for how to survey fish, working with each other on what worked and what didn't work, and teaching people how to ID fish. And it was just a really great week of camaraderie and learning. And incidentally, the Nature Conservancy had been helping them. And the Nature Conservancy sent 3 interns that week. One was Christy Pattengill, now Christy Simmons, Dr. Christy Simmons, who is on the board of the Women Divers Hall of Fame now.
Yes, she is.
Yes, and her now husband, Bryce Simmons, who was a professor at Scripps, and Emily Schmidt, who's now Emily Schmidt-Lavin, and she's head of biological sciences at Nova Southeastern University. And Christy also now, fast forwarding 33 years later, is co-executive director of Reef, along with another really fabulous conservationist, Martha Klitsky. So they are co-executive directors of Reef. And so that was my journey from computers. I just couldn't look back after that. That's what I wanted to do, was dive and watch fishes.
So from its beginnings to what it is now, that must be phenomenal for you to just look back and really soak that in. Are there any reflection points that you'd like to share? I mean, what began as something small has turned into a massive citizen science collective. That's phenomenal. Any reflective points? Was this ever in your realm of possibility? Help work me through that.
I I don't think Paul and Ned ever envisioned it growing to what it is. And I started as a volunteer. I worked as a volunteer surveyor for a couple of years, and then when Ned and I decided to get married, then I was kind of brought more into the day to day because Ned and Paul were very hands on the first 10 or 12 years of Reef. But I guess my reflection is that Reef did not happen as a result of one person's work or two people's work. Reef has become this amazing community that it is because of the community. Our volunteers, our many, many employees from the very beginning until now, our incredible team that we have now, our interns, our volunteers. We have volunteers on the ground in Key Largo. We have volunteers everywhere. And then we have our surveyors. And then we have our supporters who may not survey, or they may survey and support us financially. All of this happened from this big community. It wasn't the work of one person. And it was so seat of the pants in the early years. And for it to be this incredible organization now, due a great deal in part to our current team and our current co-executive directors. It's just, it's mind-boggling to me, and I'm just so proud to be a part of it.
I bet you are. It's got to be a sense of pride to your sentiment. It's just to see it, nurture it, and watch it grow is phenomenal. So in some of the notes that I read to prepare, you had mentioned that you were initially claustrophobic and afraid of the ocean. Many people who feel that way never touch the water. So you mentioned the swirling school of barracuda under the boat ladder, and that completely shattered the fear and drove you straight into the dive shop. I've been thinking about that since the moment you said it, and it was one of my questions here. A lot of what we do in these Voices Beneath the Wave podcasts, we talk about pivots, we talk about career pivots, personal pivots, but we also talk about overcoming fear and the tools that we have in our toolbox for when something is uncomfortable or we're facing something adverse. Is there anything in your toolbox that you use when you're faced with a situation that is uncomfortable, that is scary? In the Anna mind, what do you use in that toolbox? Is there anything that you can share with the viewership?
Well, the few situations that I've found myself in, first of all, I'm a coward, so I try not to put myself in situations that are really dangerous. And I'm really good about knowing my limits physically. I don't always know my limits with my brain, but I'm pretty good about, my physical limitations. But the couple of times that I have been in kind of scary situations, I've always remembered, it goes back to dive training and dive education. And I remember my very first open water instructor, the one thing he drilled into us is if you ever, a big part of panic is that you're not breathing enough and he always said, just stop what you're doing, slow down, forget about whatever task loading you have going on, just stop. If you have to drop on your knees or if you just have to hover, stop and breathe and don't think about anything else. And the few times that I have ever been kind of close to maybe panic, I always remembered that. And I would just stop. And that enables me to kind of, so that, that's more of a physical thing than a mental thing, but it's something I've carried with me. And as far as overcoming the claustrophobia, I still will if I get in a crowded elevator in the winter with a heavy winter coat on or something, I still don't like that. That still bothers me.
Yeah, that bothers me too. A crowded elevator, just that is not a fun situation. So, and that I mean, I think that just stop either clear your brain or just give it some space can apply to not only in the water but out of the water, because a lot of us have adverse situations that we have to respond to. We have no choice. So that fear can creep into everybody, and just having maybe some of that in the toolbox where you stop, maybe clear the brain, maybe allow the thoughts in, name them, put them on the shelf, and move forward. So it's in this world of ever-changing communication styles, the battery of information coming at us, it is overwhelming, I think, for everybody. And those that are looking to make a pivot, because your pivot from a mathematician to Reef is it's a 180, and that has got to take a lot of guts to make that shift. You mentioned that you were a coward before. Maybe that was just in the physical, but that is a bold move, my friend. Especially back then, career paths for women were different back then. So talk me through that. Does that hit with you, being a mathematician and then completely doing a 180? Were you afraid? Was it just, I need to do this?
I was never afraid because I always felt that I was young enough to start over if I needed to. So at my age now, I wouldn't be starting over in something new. But back then, I always felt, I had the education and the tools, and, if something, walking away from a computer career, I could always go back as long as I was relevant. Now things have changed so much, I could never go back to that field. But I wasn't afraid to start over. And I think that's what that helped a lot.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so in part of the literature that you sent, you have a hyperlexic eye. Can you explain to the viewership what that, because I Googled it, I didn't know what that was. What is that, and how do you apply it to what you do?
Well, I was hyperlexic as a child. When I was 5 years old, I was already reading books. I don't even know how I learned to read, but I know I started first grade at the age of 5. And I just remember having my teacher take me in, and my parents were already there in the principal's office, and they opened a book and told me to read. And I read, I just knew. And the teacher, it was this phenomenon. And my parents were like, oh yeah, we all read, they were so out of it. But I didn't know until I was much older, when I was trying to figure out what was going on with me, that there's a word for it. There wasn't a word for it in the 50s, but hyperlexia is when someone is, as my grandmother said, precocious. And you start reading at age 2 or age 5 or whenever. But in my case, I could read at a college level as a 5-year-old, but eventually I grow up to be college level. So now I'm no longer reading, above my grade level, because I'm at that grade level. So that part of it was, was just kind of off my plate at that point. But I do see things. I can pick patterns out. I can pick things out of patterns very easily, which has served me well on the Reef when I'm looking for something. When a pattern breaks, I see it. And it's worked. I was a bug collector when I was a kid. I could see bugs. I could see things that other people didn't see. My best friend was a birder early in my computer career, and I could often go out with her in the field, and I would see birds before she could see them. And she would always say, how do you see these birds? So that has served me well. I think that's a trait that carried over from the hyperlexia. I'm also, to my detriment, I get hyper focused, and that has I will just hyper focus on something. And people who've traveled with us, and poor Ned, who's long suffering over this, know that I will be hyper focused on something, and I will spend an entire month traveling through Raja Ampat on a liveaboard, looking at these beautiful things, and all I'm looking for is one thing, a particular worm or ctenophores or whatever I happen to be focused on. But where that has served me is that I've seen, because that's all I look for that
Yeah.
month. I've seen some amazing things, and I've found some really amazing behaviors and things like that. So it served me well that way, although I suspect I've missed out on a lot of the really gorgeous, I mean, I've appreciated the beautiful reefs we've been on, but, I'm still, that hyper focus has, I think it's served me well. And, once in a while, Ned will,
1,000%.
yeah, and, Ned will have to say, I love you, but please don't show me another Tina 4, you know?
Well, he knows you so well. He knows you so well. So being looking at the micro and the macro, it really truly must have served you well on the gorgeous reefs that you've traveled. Is there a particular reef that happens to be a favorite that you could never tire from? And do you have a go-to reef or spot?
No, and I remember when you were interviewing Catherine Castle, and I think it was like maybe she was the one who said it. I can't remember, but that your favorite place is where you are right then.
Yes.
So that's always our favorite reef, or our favorite destination is where we are right there in the moment. And so I can't say that I really have a favorite place. We went to Lembe. We dived in Lembe for 20 years. We went the first time in 1999. Paul and Ned took a group there, and we had 26 divers there, and they'd never had that many at the resort before. And Ned and I were so taken with it that we went back every year from 99. And I think our last trip was there in 2023, and we only missed maybe 2 years, but we were there anywhere from 3 weeks to 2 months. And we
Wow.
loved it. And so that was a big part of our really good memories about diving. We found so many unusual things. We spent a lot of time in Bonaire because we were invited to do to do some marine life education. And we went in 2003, I think. And then we went every year until 2022, with skipping a couple of years, COVID, of course, and a couple of other times. But we were the marine life, I don't know, the on-site naturalists there at Buddy Dive all those times. And we usually stayed 3 to 5 weeks, and we were usually there every September. And that's where we really learned a lot about what divers are interested in and what the takeaways should be for divers. So, Ned did a slideshow. We taught a fish ID course. We led guided dives on the boat. We did a mangrove snorkel every week. I would take people off the dock in the evenings to go watch coral spawning or watch hamlet spawning. And we learned that the biggest thing was what we call search image. If we could show people something, and once they saw it for the first time, it was theirs. They had the search image for it. And they would come back to us at the end of the week and say, I never even knew about that until you showed it to us in the slideshow. And now I saw it on like almost every dive. So that became our goal, was to help divers get search images for the really little things and the interesting things that they might see on the reef. And that was, so Lembe and Bonaire were where we spent a lot of time. But really, wherever we happen to be diving at the time has always been our favorite place. We've been to Japan and Australia and Solomons and Fiji and the Philippines and all over the Caribbean. And I just, I love them all.
Nice. It's sounds like a very well-traveled career.
We're really, really lucky.
Yeah, well, hard work pays off. So I know in reading what you sent me and my research, you've worked hard for what you've earned, and it's amazing to see the culmination of that with your travels, with Reef, and everything that you've pretty much gifted to science and education. It's pretty phenomenal. So originally, I guess you didn't want to be a photographer, but Ned convinced you to pick up the video camera and record behaviors. Today, your reels have millions of views. And your footage has appeared on the BBC, National Geographic, and Z Frank's True Facts. How does it feel to know your consumer grade camera captured things that world-class broadcast teams missed just because either you knew what to look for or you had that eye? Does that invoke any kinds of feelings for the reluctant photographer that now has millions of views for really cool stuff?
Well, I was driven by the fact that I cannot help when I see something that excites me, I want everybody to see it. And I will drive people crazy trying to get them to see it. And so what pleases me about that, I shot with I've always shot with a consumer camera. I can't handle a big camera. I just couldn't deal with that. So I've always shot with something small. And that was really on Ned's advice because then it made me more mobile. And and I think that I was able to capture some really interesting behaviors because I was so focused on learning about behavior and Ned's the same way, we would recognize things as they were about to happen, or we'd recognize it as it was happening, or we realized like these frogfish are going to spawn. A lot of people would just swim by the frogfish, but we saw them and we knew that they were going to spawn. So we stayed with them. So it's those sorts of things that I just being prepared. But I don't get the kick out of knowing that they've been seen so much as I do that people see them, that, I can open people's eyes to these really cool behaviors. And
It's inspiring.
yeah. And it takes me to conservation because, we talked about education and conservation, and it's really hard to convince people to want to protect something or conserve something if they don't even know it exists. If you don't know these things exist, then why would you even care about them? And climate change and coral bleaching is so much on our minds right now. We're really grieving for what's happening. And we were told back in the 60s and 70s that this was happening. And then we were told the voices got louder in the 80s and it got louder in the 90s. And then we were hit in the face with it, coral, warming oceans and bleaching corals. And, people need to understand what we're losing. And so when Ned and I lived off and on in Bimini from 95 to 99. And that's when we worked on the behavior book. But, when did the manta rays and the whale sharks come through? They came through in late May when the sponges and brain corals were spawning. They came through in late August and September when the hard corals and other things were spawning. They were coming through because they were feeding on that. But they're big, iconic, beautiful animals that get a lot of attention. But there are a lot of little things that live on these coral reefs that people don't realize we're going to lose. There are butterfly fishes in the Pacific, and I think a couple of wrasses that can only eat a specific coral. And there are little fishes that live, and shrimps and crabs that live in certain corals. That's where they live. They've evolved over eons to live in those corals and to feed on those specific corals. So when a coral reef bleaches and you lose so many of those corals, those little fish and invertebrates, they don't have time to evolve to learn to find a new food source or a new home. They're going to starve or they're going to die. And so if people, you think, well, a manta or a whale shark can keep swimming. It could swim on and find another food source, hopefully. But these little fishes on these reefs have nowhere to go. And so that, to me, is the real key, that we need to educate people about what we're losing. And so that's why I think marine life education is so important, especially right now.
I couldn't agree with you more. And so your Sensational Seas DVD raised significant money for ocean nonprofits, featuring narrations by legends like Stan Waterman and even licensed music from Elvis and Billy Preston. How did you pull together the global filmmaking community to donate their work for charity before YouTube made video sharing easy? I mean, you were talking about understanding what we have that could be lost. How did you pull all that together? What was the impetus for that?
Well, again, I was driven. When Ned and I traveled, Ned and Paul and I traveled, we would meet, all the places that we went to, we always would meet a photographer or a videographer who had some really cool video to show us. They'd show us some amazing behavior that they'd shot. And, I personally, I might see some of those at some point, but I knew a lot of them, they were just in the right place at the right time. And I thought, people need to see this stuff. And so, I talked to Ned about it, and I said, DVDs are really big then. This was pre-YouTube. And we were having dinner with Michelle and Howard Hall at, I think, DEMA or someplace, and I was kind of bouncing this off. And I said, the problem is I can get all these people to contribute and put a DVD together, a little anthology, but I don't know how I would pay people. And I was kind of bouncing it. And Michelle said, just do it for charity. Why don't you just, people will donate and do it for charity. So I think one of our, I don't know if it's a strength, maybe it's just being really dumb, but, I jump into things that I don't really know how to do, but I plow through and pull it off. And it's always with the help of a lot of people. I've got a couple of volunteers who helped actually program a DVD. I had volunteers help me teach me how to edit and actually do the editing on the first DVD. We did two. We did Sensational Seas 1 and Sensational Seas 2. When I found out how much it would cost to license, one of the contributors sent a piece already edited, and it was edited to Elvis music. And there was no way you could edit it to anything else because it just wouldn't have worked. And so, but if I looked, when I found out the cost to edit, to license that, it was like that, we can't afford that. So, we went out and found sources to help fund it and grants. And, there were friends who had some money and said, well, I'll help you with that. And so we were able to license the music. And then I had a friend who, my son's high school friend, was a composer, and he composed a few pieces for it. So, I just got everybody to donate these pieces, and Stan and Kat Holloway narrated the first one. And then Stan and Annie Crawley narrated the second one. But what's so funny is the first one came out in 2003, which was about the time, I guess, YouTube was starting to take off. And we did a press run of 5,000 DVDs, and we sold them out. They sold out. We put them on, I think, online and through New World, and gave a bunch to Reef. But when the second one came out in 2010, YouTube was well on the scene. And it was a lot harder to sell that DVD because people were now, had left DVDs behind, and they were watching things online. So that was a lesson learned in what happens with technology too.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of voices, our listeners are listening to your voice right now, but you were once recorded, the voice welcoming visitors into the National Aquarium in Washington, D.C., and you voiced Chewy the seal for Noah. How did that come about, and how cool was that to do?
It's a long story, but I had narrated a bunch of videos. I think they were on YouTube. And then we had a friend who was up there. We were visiting. Ned was speaking at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. So we were in DC, and the friend had said, we're doing a public service announcement. And we're also, the original National Aquarium was in the Commerce Building in downtown Washington. It was in the basement. And I used to visit that aquarium when I was in the computer industry, and used to go up there on business. And it's now closed, sadly. But they said, well, come, we've got the studio over on whatever street, and we want you to read this narration. So it turned out that it was welcome to the National Aquarium in Washington, D.C. And it was this whole little thing. But I recorded it, and for years, it was what they played when you entered the lobby. And then the same thing, I don't remember how the connection was, but they were doing some public service announcements for Chewy, with Chewy the seal. And this one was maybe a plastic pollution or something. So I recorded that one here at home on my computer and sent it up. And I was Chewy the seal in one of the PSAs.
That's super cute. That must have been fun it must have been a little, when I hear my voice, I think, oh gosh, but it must have been kind of neat hearing your voice voiced as Chewy the seal. It must have been really cute.
I didn't try to do a different voice. I just did it, like, "Hi, Chewie the Seal." So, anyway, it was fun.
It's so cute. It's so cute. I loved that. So I had to look it up too because I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm gonna totally switch gears. You and Ned have been a team for decades. Um, you've described yourself as the fact checker, passing articles back and forth 20 times or more. Um, Ned, you and Ned have worked together for your career. How is it to work with your partner? It's I worked with my partner and have for 30 years. So this is a loaded question, and I can make some fun jokes, but what has it been like? What is the event? How would you describe this adventure?
I don't know. It was the luck of my life. And we think so much alike, but he is really the sane voice in the family. And he was my hero. He's still my hero. And he's such a good writer and such a good storyteller. And so I'm more of the I'm very pedantic and like, no, you can't, there's no artistic license in this. You've got to stay on track. And so we have this give and take, and it just has just always worked out. And it's just been a great partnership.
It's nice to see that. I see it in the diving industry. Partnerships like that that span decades, and to see what two people that respect and care for each other can do when they work together. There's no competition. It is a team effort, and it's special. And you're an inspiration to many to have accomplished what you've accomplished and built what you've built to gift back to citizen science. I think it's phenomenal what you've built. Um, what's next? Do you have projects on the horizon? What would you like to accomplish next?
Well, we spent like the last 30 years on the go all the time. We always laugh because Ned's hobby is gardening, and he had the best vegetables and things that we never got to eat, and the most beautiful flowers and sunflowers that we never got to see because they all bloomed while we were on the road. And so, we finally have time to take care of some of that, but we were on the go so much that we never had time to really take stock of what we had. And during COVID, I bought a scanner, and I mean, we had stacks and stacks and stacks of magazines where we'd had articles and all the different dive publications. And so I scanned them all. That was my big project, scanning. And we have a project kind of going. Nat Gibbs, who's under the jungle down in the Yucatan. She came up in January. Ned was a filmmaker before back in the 70s, and he and some friends made a cave film. And there's a long story about who I'd never met. It got tied up in acquisitions, and there's a long story about that. But they did, in the end, sell a lot of that footage. But the film that they made, that they always wanted to finish, never was it. They have it, but it never got shown. So Nat came up, and she's looking at it now, and we have a little project going on with that to maybe, that people have taken so much better footage now, but theirs was probably one of the first films ever shot down in Yucatan in the caves, and it's beautiful. And there's a lot of history behind the team that worked on it. There were 14 divers, and Wes Skiles was one of the cameramen. It was one of his first jobs, and it was all volunteers. The divers were all volunteer. They all went down and they pulled this off, and it's an amazing story. So it's been my goal after I saw the film. It's sitting in cans in our closet in the hall, but after I saw the VHS rough edit, I started pushing Ned and Guy and Clark, the three who produced the film, to do something with it. So hopefully, so that's one project. The other thing that we're doing is we have a lot of magazine articles that we've written that no one will ever see because, the publications aren't online. The articles now, the alert diver years, the most recent, the last, I guess, 10, 12 years that we wrote, or maybe longer for alert diver, those are still online on alert diver. But we have so many of these old, great articles, like some that Ned wrote in the 70s and 80s about caves and diving in the early days. So I'd like to figure out a way to maybe put them up on my blog or get them, I've scanned them all out to where people could see them, just for the historical value of them.
Oh, absolutely. That would be an amazing historical gift.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
so you're keeping busy.
Yeah, and I'm also talked Ned into narrating some of our favorite magazine articles. He's such a good storyteller. And we have a lot of magazine articles that, maybe the story was told and then we published with the story maybe 2 or 3 images. And I have video that I shot to go with those images. Ned has a lot of images that never made it to press with that article. So we were thinking about, I'm selling him on this, of having, and we're doing a test run, having him read the article. So this is the story in Ned's voice. And then I'm going to overlay his voice with the video and the extra images that never got shown, never got published. And so we were thinking about trying some of those out to see how those go. And so, yeah, we've got all this material. And then, of course, Paul Human passed away in 2024, but we still have the publishing company and we still maintain the books. So, so we stay busy with that too. So yeah, there's a lot to do, and we're still diving. We're just not diving as much.
Gotcha. And so your work with Reef, you're on the board of directors, correct?
Yes, we still serve on the board of trustees. We have an amazing board. And when Paul passed away, well, he retired from the board a few years before he passed away. And I was already serving on the board, but I served as board chair just for those transition years. But I'm not a leader. I'm not a leader. So it was not something that I wanted to do long term. So we have an incredible board now, but Ned and I still serve on the board. And we still are, very avid supporters and volunteers.
That's amazing. So there was something, we're getting close to wrapping up, but there's something that I definitely wanted to share, and it was it's another shift. So there was a public service announcement. Did you want me to share it, or would you like to share it?
Well, I don't mind sharing it. I want to tell people, women, don't skip your mammograms. We were diving and traveling, and I get a mammogram every year. I don't skip them. And in 2023, I had my mammogram, and they found a mass. So I was diagnosed with stage 1 cancer, breast cancer, but it had already spread. It had already spread into my lymph nodes. So I had to go through some pretty drastic treatment because it was a fairly aggressive cancer. And I had to go through everything: surgery, chemotherapy, extended radiation therapy, oral drugs. And, the bottom line is every year at the beginning of the year, I take our calendar and write down all the things we have to do that year. And in 23, in January, I had said to Ned, I'm 70. Maybe I will just get a mammogram every couple of years now. And he said in January, you've been so good. You've gone every year. Don't skip it. It's easy. Don't skip the mammogram. So I didn't. I went, and I go every summer, and they found the cancer. If I had skipped it like I had proposed, and it had not been for Ned to say, no, you need to keep getting them, it would have spread a lot more than it did. So, so that's my message, my public service announcement. Don't skip your mammograms.
It's an important message. Many of us have family members, close friends, you yourself have been touched in some way, shape, or form by breast cancer. So for women, I I sometimes feel women put themselves last on the list of things to take care of, and that is one thing to not put last on the list, and to advocate for it. And there are different types of screenings in addition to mammograms, like ultrasounds, that you can demand. So being an advocate for yourself and your health is super important. It can save a life. So
Yes. Yeah, and I feel I'm so grateful for the medical care I had, and, a lot of people didn't know about this. I wasn't it wasn't a secret. I was happy with telling people, but I didn't have the space in my head to deal. So I got some good advice from a friend who had gone through about 6 she lives overseas, but she had gone through this about 6 months before, and she said, "Look, don't feel like you have to set up one of those sites to keep people up. Don't feel like you need to do all this. Just look out for yourself." And that's what I did. I told everyone that I told, I said, it's not a secret. You can tell people. I just don't have the bandwidth to be telling everybody. I just need to deal with this. And that's what I did. But don't skip the mammogram. That's the main thing.
yes, so I'm glad that you brought that up, and thank you for allowing me to share it on this platform. If it inspires one person to go get checked, I think we've done our job. So,
Yeah.
is there anything else you want to? Is there anything I didn't cover, or anything you want to leave the viewership with?
I think we need, in addition to telling people the ocean stories about the animals, we need to support our young people. We need to support our interns. Women Divers Hall of Fame has this amazing scholarship program. Reef has an amazing, very robust internship program. We need to support our young people because they're the ones who give me hope that we might be able to solve these problems in the end. So, that's the thing I'd like to leave with people is we need to give our youth the tools they need to deal with what's happening.
1000%. I couldn't agree with you more. Anna, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. And I can't wait to meet you in person. This was a lovely interview, and I could have asked a lot more, but I wanted to be conscious of time. And I can't thank you enough for being part of this tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Great. So just a couple of wrapping up. The Women Divers Hall of Fame is a nonprofit. We raise money for scholarships and grants. To date, we have raised over $1 million for said scholarships and grants to promote individuals passionate about the diving industry. It could be anything from conservation to photography to training grants. In addition to what Reef has for robust internships, I implore people to check out what is available and follow us along. So until then, I hope everybody has a great evening. Thank you.